Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. It was a slight delay there just due to some technical issues, so thank you so much for bearing with us. Our next presenter on the main stage is Elly from Natwest Group. So Elly is in the growth and relationships team, and she's been at Natwest Group for a couple of years and also done an internship as well. So Elly, I can just see you're on your slides there. There we go. We can see them perfectly. So Elly, I'm going to drop out of this and I'll hand over to yourself. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much. And it's great to obviously see you all, obviously virtually. So I suppose I'll just do a quick introduction to who I am, a bit about my background and my career, and where I am today. And then I think we're going to go into some questions as well afterwards. So my name's Elly Masters. So I am on the private banking relationship management graduate scheme at Coutts. And as Ali just said, my journey at Coutts officially, I suppose, started in September 2019 when I started on the graduate scheme. But I had previously done an internship at Coutts before. It was in the same department in private banking and relationship management, and I absolutely loved it. And I suppose going back even further than that, I, went to school, did my GCSE, stayed on at sixth form, and then I went to UCL in London and I studied German and Spanish. And then I went straight off to Coutts. So I'm just here to tell you a bit more about the programme that I'm on today. And I think there's going to be some questions as well about different experiences that I've had, challenges that I've overcome as well. So I suppose I'll start by telling you a bit more about the programme and what it entails. So it's called relationship management. And I think, one of the biggest misconceptions that I made was before I started was that I probably didn't understand what either private banking or relationship management was before I started at Coutts. I very much had the perception that banking was all about numbers and maths and finance and credit cards and things like that. And I couldn't be more shocked when I started at Coutts on the internship. I suppose that's the difference really between banking and private banking. And what I really found and what I absolutely loved about it was the relationship side. It wasn't about maths and numbers and products and services that the customers and the clients were using. It was actually about really building strong relationships with these clients as well. Really becoming their trusted advisor, becoming the one almost like a family member who that they can rely on and speak to, during the best and the worst times of their lives. So that's something that I was really shocked about when I first started at Coutts, but something that I think actually really helped me fall in love with Coutts as well. So there are lots of different programs that run across Natwest Group as a whole. Coutts is just one part of Natwest. There are lots and lots of different parts of the network. There's commercial banking, there's retail banking, and there are a whole host of different graduate programs that you are able to do, not only in the sort of finance side of things, but also data, HR, you name it. At Natwest Group, there is a placement or an internship for you to do in that area. So I think, are we going to come on to some questions now, or shall I just continue on?
Hey Elly, yeah, continue on, and we'll keep going for questions in about 4:15.
Great, perfect, thank you. So I suppose now what I'll go on to is some of the misconceptions that I realised when I started Coutts and what I thought Coutts would be like. So before I started, I thought I would have to be a genius in everything banking and finance related. I remember when I was preparing for the interviews and, before I even started, I'd secured the placement before I started at Coutts. I remember cramming, watching as many YouTube videos as possible on, different financial products, investments, etc. And in reality, none of that really matters. Obviously, it's good to have a baseline level of knowledge around, the financial services sector. But in fact, that is something that you learn on the job completely. And this is something that you get taught you know, through your peers, your seniors at work. And it's really something that I probably worried a lot more than I should have about. So and my biggest piece of advice for you all today would be to really not worry about exactly that, what I was worried about being an expert in, you know, finance and anything finance related. You learn on the job. When you start, you're all treated as equal. You know, you start and they treat you all as if you're at exactly the same baseline. None of you have got any knowledge about any of the products and services, and then you take it from there. So I never felt isolated from my peers, as if I wasn't as good enough at all. So it was absolutely brilliant for me, especially being a languages graduate. I didn't exactly, you know, fit what you would assume to be the typical brief, you know, either an accounting graduate or a finance graduate, you know, something a bit more to do with the sector, but I didn't experience absolutely any of that at all. And just while we're on the theme, I suppose, of misconceptions, and obviously it's a huge part of the presentation today, is around being a woman in the financial services industry. And, you know, I'm sure you're all aware of the sort of history of this sector. And, you know, in years gone by, it was a very male-dominated sector and industry. You know, females, if they were involved in the industry, it was, you know, for administrative purposes. And it was very much the men, you know, that would give the clients the advice and that would lead the relationships and the bank as a whole. But what I would really say about Coutts and Natwest Group as a whole is that I've really not experienced anything like this. In fact, something a million miles away from that. Starting as a woman in the Natwest Group, I've never felt inferior to my peers that are males at all. I find that we all get absolutely equal opportunities, which is great. We're all encouraged to participate in what we call our employee-led networks. So, for example, we have the Gender Network, we have the Enable Network, which focuses around supporting our colleagues with disabilities. We have the BAME Network. So I really do feel that it's top of the bank's agenda, talking around all of these important issues. And I suppose gender is one of them, but I really haven't experienced that myself. All of my leadership teams are very balanced. I wouldn't say that I've ever felt that I've worked in a male-dominated environment. So I would say that that's it's absolutely great. So in terms of a few other pieces of advice and what I wish I would have known before I started at Coutts or started my career in general, this one will probably sound quite generic at the start, but it really does resonate with me, and I hope it does with you all too. And this is the power of networking. So, you know, I remember sitting at presentations, you know, throughout my time at university, and even when I started work, even about how important networking was. And back then, I suppose I obviously took note of them, and, you know, appreciated that networking was part of the job, you know, an important, you know, part of this industry. But if I'm completely honest, I didn't think any more of it than that. So, you know, I continued. And when I started at work, I found myself in, you know, lots of situations where I needed to network, you know, meeting senior leaders, other peers on different graduate programs. And I found it really, really difficult. You know, even simple questions where, you know, someone who you don't know comes up to you and says, tell me a bit more about yourself, or what do you do? It's really, really difficult without any practice or sort of prior thought. To actually answer that in a very sort of concise, you know, really get to the point, punchy, and sell yourself. So what I would really, really recommend for you all, and if there's anything that you take away from the presentation today, I hope it will be that you should really, really try and work on your elevator pitch. And I suppose that might sound a bit corny, and, you know, during networking, you're not there to necessarily sell yourself. But I found that was a really good way for me to, in a short, concise and punchy way, describe who I am, what I'm about, what my ethos is, and what I do on a day-to-day basis. And I find that I have a couple of different versions of the elevator speech or pitch, depending on who I'm speaking to, what the sort of event is. But I found that something like that needs a lot of work, something that I didn't even expect. And it's something that I think will really help you all. So there's absolutely loads of content around, on the internet, YouTube, etc. And just find what works for you. But definitely the biggest piece of advice is to practice that. And really make that elevator pitch as punchy as possible. And now I suppose I'll just talk a little bit around applications and things. Now, obviously, you're all here today and you're at a financial services event, which is absolutely great. So I assume a lot of you have got a keen interest in a future career or possible career in the finance services industry, which is great. And my biggest piece of advice for you all when you're applying for different opportunities is to really keep your options open. Apply for as many different opportunities as you can. There are so many insight days, whether they're virtual or hopefully in the future, maybe even in the office again. But there are so many different opportunities that you can do, speaking to different colleagues, connecting with people on LinkedIn who look as if they've got a really interesting job, for example. It's just really trying to spread yourself as broad as possible. And that is my biggest piece of advice for you because, as I explained a bit earlier on, private banking and relationship management was nothing like what I assumed it would be. And you often find that in life that once you start something, it often turns out to be completely different to what you'd ever imagined before. So in terms of applications that I undertook, I'll be quite open in saying that I applied for lots of different opportunities, both at the internship level and the graduate scheme level. I think it's really important that you apply for different types of roles as well. For example, just for an easy example, if you wanted to be a fund manager, for example, or an investment manager, it's great if you're applying for as many investment management opportunities as possible. But as well, why don't you take the opportunity to apply for something slightly different, like a fund research placement or an insight day into, ESG and sustainable investments, something that's to do with the sector and what you think you're interested in, but a slightly different role. And then by going through the application process, hopefully getting to the assessment centre, just gives you a bit of a feel for the different sorts of roles and what's actually out there. Sometimes in life, you have your mind set on something and you think, I'm going to be a private banker when I'm older, and that's absolutely it. And I know that I'm going to be a banker 100%. And then, life has a funny way of going about things. And then all of a sudden, it might end up that you realise, actually, I didn't ever want to be a banker. I wanted to be a wealth manager, a financial planner instead. So I think that's just really an important piece of advice that I'd like to share with you today. And while I suppose we're on the topic of applications, one thing that I would say that I definitely underestimated, and I assume some of you on this call have probably already had lots of experience of this already, is the amount of time that it takes for all of these applications. Especially if you're applying for lots of different opportunities. Every application that you make, there are various different stages. You have to answer competency questions, examples of what you would do in certain situations. There might be a video assessment, there might be a role play, there might be a assessment centre, whether it's virtual or in person. But that's what I really underestimated during my time at university. I imagined my time at university to be very predominantly spent on my academic side, my assignments, my studies, reading for the course, exam prep, etc. And I was surprised how much time I had to take away from that to dedicate to, career progression and applying for these opportunities, researching what's around. But what I would definitely say is if that's one of the biggest tips that I'd give you all today, is really try and plan as well as you can. If you know that you've got assignments coming up and exams, and that's around the time that a lot of applications open for various different opportunities, it's a really good idea just to sort of get a head start, either start the revision a bit earlier or start preparing for what the application questions could be, you know, absolutely as early as you can. It would just make your lives a lot easier, make things a lot less stressful. But really just remember that that's key, that obviously you're at university to study for your degree, you know, and everything like that. But at the end of it, you're going to need to, you know, go into something, a line of work, or you could continue studying, but at some point I assume that you're going to want to progress into one of these industries. So that would be the biggest piece of advice for you. And I think just one more sort of element that I'd like to touch on just before we go for any questions that have been submitted. I would just like to touch on some challenges that I've faced. Obviously, I spoke very positively of my experience at Natwest Group, and it has been, but as with any job, there are challenges that you have to overcome. There are bumps in the road, things go wrong or differently to how you had planned, and I think it's all around how you come back from that. And the biggest one for me was I started obviously at Coutts, and I was on a program and I was on a scheme, and I just assumed that I'd plod along on the scheme and that everything would go as the scheme sort of instructed. I would just follow all of the placements and achieve the objectives and work towards them as it was instructed. And then one day there was a business need, and they needed a graduate to go into another team to work. And actually, it was quite a privilege to be asked to go into this other team. I'd been identified as an individual who they wanted to help with this project. However, it did feel a bit like a bump in the road for me. It felt like I was coming off course a little bit. You know, I'd always had in my head that this was my path, this is what I was doing. I'd planned it out for the next couple of months. And then all of a sudden, I was, you know, doing something completely different. But actually, when I look back and on my initial reaction to this, what I would say is that things like that happen for a reason. You know, paths are twisting, they turn, and there's bumps and everything like that. And it's how you approach those challenges and come back from them. And actually, during those placements and the times where I come away from the scheme, it's probably the times where I learned the most. I was sort of thrown in at the deep end, you know, doing completely different things. And in my case, it was actually with commercial customers. So it opened my eyes up to a whole host of, you know, other ideas, elements to the financial services industry that I'd never even experienced before. So that's what I would definitely say, is don't ever be disheartened if your path changes or you're doing something, you find yourself doing something different to what you thought you would initially. It all works out in the end, and everything is if you look at everything as a development opportunity, an opportunity to develop your skills further, I think you'll all go really far. Great.
Amazing, Elly. Thank you so much. That was amazing, super inspirational, and just awesome to hear your story, and really good advice there at the end. We're also being joined by Swana for the questions, and we've got about 10 minutes, and you'll be pleased to know we've got tons of really good ones. So I feel like, Elly, you covered quite a lot of this in your presentation, but there's definitely some really specific areas that people are keen to hear more about. So I think we'll kick off with Charlotte. So Charlotte, thank you so much for your question. Charlotte's question was, do you have any advice to people looking at interning for Coutts? She says she would love to intern there and just wondered if you have any tips.
Great question. And Charlotte, that sounds amazing. Definitely encourage you and everyone else on the call to apply. My top tip for you would be to really think about your client relationship building skills. So this is this is the whole ethos of Coutts. It's about building really strong relationships with the clients, becoming the trusted advisor. So that's what I would say, and throughout your interview and the application process, you know, your answers to the questions and examples, that's really what you want to try and show, is the people skills and the relationship building. So that would be my top tip for you all on applying for internships at Coutts. But great to hear. Good luck with it.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. And Hazel's got a really good one here as well, and it's completely up to you both who wants to take this one. But she says, have you struggled at all getting a good work-life balance? She says she's heard that banking is notorious for long hours and high expectations. Can either of you shed any light on that one?
Yeah, I can take this one. So yeah, I think there is this, again, I think sometimes misconception that the work-life balance is hard to get. But what I think is important to remember that within banking, there's so many different roles that you can go for. So if you're someone that really wants a specific type of work-life balance, you can find the placement or the part of the bank that's right for that. And I think that's the benefit of, so I'm on the commercial scheme, and I think that's one of the benefits of being on the commercial scheme. You get to do placements in different parts of the bank, and so find that role where you get that right work-life balance. So I think it's quite easy to find if you're having these open conversations with your managers and letting them know that this is important to you. That's something you can definitely find.
Amazing, thank you so much for that. Still kind of continuing on the theme of challenges, but this time I guess a bit more around networking. So we've had a question around, do you have any advice on how to overcome feeling nervous or nerves when networking?
Yeah, I can start off with this one. I think this is something that everyone probably struggles with, particularly when you're starting out in your career. And I think the best thing to do is you'll get used to it. So at the beginning it's hard, and it's particularly again with the type of grad scheme I'm on, you start a new placement, so you're constantly networking with different people, and you just get used to it. And I think in terms of networking advice I'd have is I'd suggest is linking in with people on LinkedIn, setting up coffee catch-ups, all of these things. And once you start doing these things, it just becomes easier, but it's just something that you get better at over time. I don't think there's like a secret in terms of networking. It's just one of those things that you get better with over time.
Yeah, amazing. Anything you'd add to that, Elly? Oh, I think she's all good. All right, we'll chat through a couple of others, and we've got time for a few more. So one thing that was asked was, do you think that they would expect more of you if you did have a degree in finance or accounting compared to, say, someone that's got a degree in geography, for example?
I don't think so at all. I think regardless of what your degree background is, the expectation of you is pretty much the same, and that's that you come into work and you show an attitude of wanting to learn, an attitude of being proactive. It's more your attitude, that's what they're looking for. They're not looking for you to know things. And if there is something that you need to know for the role, you kind of cover that in the qualifications that you do as part of the schemes as well. So yeah, Elly kind of touched on this. I don't think your degree background has anything to do with, how successful you are.
Amazing. Thanks so much for that. I think that's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because sometimes you think that, is my degree going to be like the making of me in where I end up in my career? But actually, so often it's all about those transferable skills you get with your degree and how you apply them. Coming back to gender, obviously today is all about inspiring females. Someone's asked, is the workplace a 50-50 gender split at the moment? Now, I know lots of banks are, working towards gender targets, but can you shed any light on what the split looks like in the workplace?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah, good.
Good. I would say definitely there's a 50-50 split overall, but you'll get different balances in different teams. And obviously that's something that all organisations are working towards, but you will get those different balances that will still persist, but that's something that obviously we're working on. Leadership teams maybe even 10, 20 years ago would have looked completely different and would have been, extremely male dominated, not just at Natwest, but in, all of the financial services firms. And obviously our very own CEO is female, and she's brilliant in this space. So yeah, I would definitely say it's 50-50, but different teams would have different, obviously balances of that as well.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. We've got a couple more minutes. There's something that has come up a little bit around, it's all about inspiration. So I'm really keen to understand, a few people have asked this as well, was there a specific moment that really inspired you into a career in financial services? And if there was, could you let us know what that was?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I remember this quite clearly. It was my first client meeting that I went to on my internship. I remember being really, really nervous, not knowing what to expect, but it actually going really well. And I remember the exact conversation we had. Half of it wasn't about banking or finance. It was actually about their family. I remember talking about they'd bought a new dog. I just remember that was a really important time for me in my career, as I understood exactly what the essence of private banking was. It wasn't all about finance and banking and everything like that. It was actually about relationships. So for me, that's what drove me forward, and supporting people and clients and my peers around me. So that was, I think, the moment for me. I don't know about you, Swarna.
Yeah, I think mine is probably something very similar. I think I ended up in finance by accident. I have a finance background, so sort of thought I had to go into banking, and then I did the internship, and it was definitely the customer element of it that really made me realize this is something that I want to continue to do. And where Elly sort of works with customers that are, it's like more individuals, I've worked with more corporates. So the sorts of things that we do often end up in the news and things like that. So I think that element of it is quite rewarding when you see that you've done a deal and then you see it in the news and you're like, you were part of that transaction. So I think that really kind of solidified that I want to kind of stay in this industry.
Amazing. That's awesome. Thank you so much, both. I'm going to end on one final question before we wrap. I just wanted to let Kelechi know, who's asked a specific question about recruitment, that you can ask those questions in the employer booths afterwards, and there'll be people there to help you on that specific question. But the last thing I wanted to say is, if you could give one bit of advice, or think of one bit of advice you were giving yourself, what would it be that you'd like to share today?
Swarna, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah. I think I think with this application process, it can be incredibly stressful. So I think one thing is just don't be disheartened. So if you get rejections, I had so many rejections before I got my internship. I think I applied for about 50. So just don't be disheartened. And it worked out for the best for me in the end. I think I'm in the company that's right for me. So just don't be disheartened. Keep trying, keep going, and make sure to get feedback as well. So if you are unsuccessful and you've had an interview, just ask what you could have done better. I think that really helped me in securing my internships as well. So that's my bit of advice, I think.
Amazing.
And I think I would just say a really big piece of advice I would give you all is really don't be afraid to ask questions. I can see you've all been great doing them on the Q&A today, which is amazing to see. But with employers, when you start in your roles and are super successful in the future, don't ever feel embarrassed or scared to ask questions. You know, everyone, even your senior leaders and, you know, the leadership team, they all started somewhere, and no question is ever a silly question. That's what I've learned. It's always better to clarify and check rather than just go along pretending that you understand and hoping that it's going to get better. You know, everyone will really value, you know, your enthusiasm to learn more, to understand more. So really just never be afraid to ask any questions. That would be my top tip for you all.
Love that. Thank you both so much. We've come to the end of time now, and I know we have another speaker coming up shortly. So, but thank you. That was absolutely brilliant. And yeah, loads of great questions from you all as well. So keep them coming in. And thanks a lot.
Great. Thanks everyone. Good luck, everyone.